Hello everyone, welcome back to episode 6 of our series on painting a Song of Ice and Fire tabletop game miniatures. In this episode we're going to be doing touch-ups across the board, deepening some colors here and there. In particular, we'll be looking at a deepening of the black on the Blackfish's horse, and some browns here and there. Later in the episode, we'll mix up a slightly off-ground to do Miss Mormon's sleeves. There's not going to be a lot of comments on this one. It's really going to be an opportunity for you to kind of relax, listen to YouTube's fine selection of free music, and just watch how we layer inks on top of one another. Speaking of layering inks, I think this is a good opportunity to talk about my flow improver. What does a flow improver mean versus a thinner? This is honestly something I only learned recently, and in fact I've been sort of assuming the two were of equal value and had an equal effect for the longest time. The reality of it is, the Vallejo flow improver does help to thin the paint, obviously, by adding a little more medium, and thinning out the pigment. It also helps different layers blend together a little more effectively, but that is not its primary purpose. Its primary purpose, as the name implies, is to improve the flow of paint or ink it is added to. What does improving the flow mean, you ask? Well, that's what I was asking as well. When we talk about improving the flow of a paint or ink that we're going to use, what we mean is we are reducing the surface tension of the paint itself. To get an idea of what impact this will have when applying it to your miniature, you can think about, for example, tap water with calcium in it. Let's say you, your kid, your sibling, or your cat put your hands in the water coming out of your sink, then shook them off, and fired splashes of that all over your mirror and your metal fittings. You've probably seen that when it dries, it leaves pretty clear little circles. Those circles, the edges of them anyway, are what might be known as tide marks. And those represent where the surface of the droplet was for the longest time before it evaporated. Because of the surface tension of the water just on its own, the pigment, or the calcium in this case, was pushed to the surface and rested in a ring around the exterior of the drop for a prolonged period of time. What does this mean for you painting miniatures? Well, as I alluded to by sort of referring to the calcium as pigment there, the pigment in your paint or ink is going to act the same way suspended in the medium. It's going to rest on the surface in a thicker layer than it would be elsewhere, mixing up our paints or inks and shaking them prior to using them, twisting our brush when we apply them to the brush. These can help make sure that all of the pigment is blended with the medium more evenly. But even then, if you apply a particularly thinned pigment to any surface, you may find that it leaves tide marks. By using a flow improver, we avoid that. By improving the flow of the paint or ink itself, we're allowing the pigment to flow, to use the same word over and over again, more evenly to all areas that you're applying it to. This will help additional layers of paint and ink look a little more uniform over top of the previous layers we'd laid down. This also means it'll keeping the viscosity of our paint or ink down, and allowing it to flow more evenly into cracks and crevasses, thereby allowing us to meet our aim of painting in this style, and using what the sculptor gave us. I hope that helps you understand a little bit more why I'm using a bottle of flow improver, air quotes included, rather than thinner or just water or alcohol. While those other methods work fine, and I think some of them also double as a flow improver, or you could use something like dish soap to act as your flow improver, using the bottle stuff has served me quite well, and so I can recommend it wholeheartedly. I hate to recommend things that I haven't used with no basis for comparison, though of course there are plenty of other miniature-based YouTubers out there who probably have a wider breadth of knowledge, maybe some good comparison videos about this sort of thing. As for me, that's all I have to say on the subject for now, so I'll leave you with the music and the footage of the touch-ups. As I was chugging along with these miniatures, I began to notice a lot of locations, particularly in the metallic areas, that I had missed due to the glare from my ring light. Since the glare shows up white and my primer is white, it was often hard to distinguish between what I had painted and what was just reflecting light back at me. Fortunately, looking at them another day, once everything was a little drier and a little less shiny, meant that I was detecting more and more spots. Since I already had some black down on my palette for doing the Blackfish spores, it was all too easy to mix in a little bit of silver, make up the same concoction again, or near enough as to make no difference, and just go around to touching up metallic areas wherever I saw them. I tend to do a lot of touching up like this, to be perfectly honest, because my attention span and my shaky hands both mean that I miss a lot of spots. That being said, since I normally give every location 2 passes-ish anyway, just to deepen in the colors at some point or other, pretty much everything gets caught. Things that don't get caught can generally just be corrected with a little application of black, to be honest. Little pro tip, most places you miss are probably going to be tucked away somewhere in an undercut or otherwise somewhat hidden from view, otherwise you probably wouldn't have missed it. And if that's the case, and you're pressed for time for some reason, just consider whether black would do the trick. In a lot of cases, it probably will, because the area is kind of shadowed anyway, and it's just going to make it not visible. This is the reason a lot of people prime with black, because then if you miss a spot, it's just accidental shading. That being said, priming with black wouldn't work for applying inks over top and just washing the color up to where you want it to be. And since that's my preferred way of working, I continue to work with the white primer. It means more touch-ups in the long run, but I think it gives a pretty nice effect, so I'm going to be sticking with it. For your part, definitely weigh the pros and cons. There are definitely lots of people out there who prime in black, or who even do highlighting in white on top of black, giving a more or less gray effect, which is not too distant from what I'm doing here. In fact, I would recommend you give that a shot. I intend to be trying some azimuthal highlighting with my airbrush at some point in the near future, and hopefully I can give a video to show kind of the effect that that gives you. But that's for a later day. Finally, painting Ms. Mormont's hair with that fiery red I'd always been envisioning for her ever since I started this project was a really invigorating step. I don't know if you've noticed the same thing with yourself, but I find that when I'm painting miniatures, I can sometimes get sort of just lose a little bit of drive halfway through the project, you know? You're starting to see things come together, but it's not quite there yet. You don't know if it's going to turn out quite right. A really good tip to help at that stage of the painting that I sort of developed for myself while I was working purely with acrylics is to save some little details to do later on that'll really pop and give you an idea of what the finished product's going to look like. When I was working with the acrylics, that was mainly the silver areas. Obviously, the way I do things now, where I have to dry brush on the silver later, I can't do it. But trust me if I say that adding metallic areas to a miniature that's not quite there yet can do wonders for suddenly making it look just way more finished than when you were first working on it that day. If you're ever needing a little boost, try and think of little details like that. This fiery red hair, for example, any bright colors you're thinking of on characters' heraldry, or the silver areas if you're working just with acrylics and sort of a three-tone shading, or however you like to do your miniatures. Alright, and that's it for today's episode. Today we went over just a little bit of touch-ups on all of our miniatures, a discussion of how Flow Improver works, and notice that I need to clean that mirror a little more often, because otherwise my flock and stuff gets on it. I hope this is educational or entertaining, or maybe both for you, and I hope you'll tune in next time as we carry on with our little saga of painting these miniatures in real time. Until then, go play some games!